The Dyatlov Pass incident is one of the eeriest, most inexplicable cold cases of the last century, and today we're doing a deep dive to see if we can find the chilling truth behind the Dyatlov Pass incident. So what is it? Well, it's one of those creepy unsolved mysteries that just never fails to get under people's skin. There's a reason why the Dyatlov Pass incident continues to be discussed and analyzed 65 years after it initially took place. You see, in 1959, 9 experienced hikers led by Igor Dyatlov went on a skiing expedition in the Ural Mountains of Russia. They never returned. When a search team eventually found their campsite, it was a total mess. Their tent was ripped open from the inside, their bodies were found scattered everywhere, some of them barely dressed despite the freezing cold, and some of the hikers had some very serious injuries like broken ribs and skulls, but no one could figure out what caused them. There were also signs of radiation on their clothes, and some of them had strange skin discoloration. People are still investigating the case, but even all these decades later, all we have are theories, some more probable than others, but no definitive answers. So with that said, let's dig deeper into one of the most unsettling and mysterious cold cases in history. When the bodies of the 9 hikers were discovered, they were in incredibly perplexing states of disarray. 5 of them were nearly completely naked, wearing nothing but their underwear or socks. The other 4 were nearly completely clothed, but still missing a few items. Stranger still, the photographs of the group later revealed that the 4 hikers found wearing clothes were actually wearing clothing items taken from the other 5. But it gets weirder still, as many of the hikers suffered from different injuries that were inconsistent with the injuries of the others. It made no sense. It still makes no sense. The first 2 members of the team, Yuri Doroshenko and Yuri Kirvan-Ishenko, were discovered with their hands entirely torn to shreds, and pieces of their flesh had been embedded into a nearby tree. The next, Igor Dyatlov, was discovered lying face up with his jacket unbuttoned and his hands clenched tightly to his chest, and his face was covered in small scratches. Rustem Solbodin had suffered from a skull fracture that split open the left side of his head, and Zinaida Kolmogorova was found covered in frostbite and small abrasions. Now here's where it gets somehow even weirder. When Nikolai Brignoles was discovered, he was well dressed and buried underneath a good few layers of snow, but his skull had been bashed in and his jaw had been severely fractured. That's not even the weird part though. The weird part was that despite the severity of Nikolai's internal injuries, they were not visible on the surface of his body. And then there's the last 3 hikers, Alexander Klevetov, Semyon Zoltarov, and Lyudmila Dubinina. Zoltaryov was discovered with his eyes completely missing, a large and wide wound in his skull, and an entire set of broken ribs. Kolevaton was missing soft tissue near his eyes and his skull, and had clearly suffered some kind of blunt force to the back of his skull behind his ear. And then there's Dubinina, who was discovered with almost no soft tissue on her face at all, and a nose that had been completely crushed. Furthermore, her mouth had been positioned wide open as though frozen in a scream, and her tongue was nowhere to be found. Aside from the state of the bodies, the tent is also one of the most bizarre aspects about this case. Whatever happened at Dyatlov Pass had clearly made these experienced hikers desperate enough to do some completely inexplicable things. It seemed like they had completely lost their minds. One of the most confusing things they did was cut their tent open from the inside, as if they'd been in such a hurry it just wasn't an option for them to all funnel out of one exit. So what could have scared them to the point where they felt the need to tear through their only shelter? On top of that, they left behind almost everything they had, including clothes. This was the Ural Mountains in the dead of winter. They left jackets, gloves, pants, and hats inside the tent. They also abandoned compasses, 3 axes, and 2 blades. If there was something attacking them, why on earth would they run out into the cold and leave all their weapons behind? It seems as though the group had been mentally compromised in some way, rather than just running from something dangerous. One of them, Semyon Zoltaryov, ran out without any clothes or gear, but he did bring his camera with him. It just doesn't make sense. The state of the hikers' campsite and their bodies scattered throughout what is now known as Dyatlov Pass in the Ural Mountains is strange and unsettling, but it's even more electric than you think. Or maybe electric is the wrong word to use to describe the alarming radiation levels of the hiker's body, discarded clothing, and campsite. No, I'm not kidding. When the hikers were found, many of them, and even more of their things, were straight up radioactive. Furthermore, many of the deceased's family members reported that during funeral services, the bodies of the hikers appeared to give off an unnatural orange glow. And furthermore than that, for some reason, their hair had started to turn gray, which is a common sign of radiation exposure. Now, let's talk about the camera. The hikers brought several cameras with them, and they took a lot of pictures, all of which, even the more mundane ones, are incredibly eerie within the context that we have now. But the most famous photo is this one right here. The last image on a camera belonging to hiker Yuri Krivnoishenko. The picture has been dubbed the 33rd frame, and it's impossible to make out exactly what it is. All we know is that there's some sort of bright light. When the searchers discovered the tent, the camera had been left set up and the lens cap was also off. It was clearly set up to take a picture before everything went south. But what had it been trying to take a picture of? Was it something they saw coming towards them in the distance but descended on them so fast they had to flee in a panic? Is this strange light coming from a person, persons, or thing that was moving towards them? Or is it just a crappy photo that he would have deleted once he got home? Although incredibly vague, the 33rd frame is considered to be one of the biggest clues as to what might have happened to the hikers. But in all honesty, I just think it raises more questions than it answers. Another strange thing about this case, other than pretty much everything, is the fact that the case was dismissed shockingly fast and without any kind of real resolution. In fact, the case closed almost as quickly as it opened. When investigators started turning up all kinds of hard to explain things that just didn't add up, the Russian government stepped in almost immediately, seized all of the case files, classified most of them, and then abruptly closed the case, with no real explanation other than the fact that a compelling force was to blame for the hikers' inexplicable and untimely demise. You see, when medical examiners looked over the bodies of the Dyatlov Pass hikers, they were completely perplexed. The injuries just didn't make sense. They don't make sense. They make no sense. And so the official cause of death for all of the hikers was listed as hypothermia. I mean, sure, they suffered from frostbite and it was cold, but that doesn't explain how each and every one of them became so badly injured and also radioactive. And so medical examiners often refer to something known as an unknown compelling force as an official explanation as to what caused the injuries and deaths of the hikers. But what exactly does that mean? I have no idea, nor do I think the doctors do either. The Russian government might though, as many people believe the real reason for the Dyatlov Pass incident is that the 9 hikers actually stumbled across some top secret KGB nuclear experiment. It's likely that we will never know the true answer. Another theory that often comes up in discussions about what might have happened that night in the mountains, though, is that it could have had something to do with UFOs. It's MA, you guys. Of course, we're gonna mention aliens at least once. As silly as many of you might think that this sounds, listen. On the night the hikers died, another group of hikers far away reported seeing some strange spheres hovering in the northern sky, and the mysterious lights were seen frequently in the area over the next 6 weeks. Lev Ivanov, the investigator in charge, reported that the tops of the trees around the hikers' campsite were charred and burned. He kept digging into the possibility that UFOs were connected to the incident, but of course he faced a lot of obstacles, and he wasn't allowed to access KGB documents about the investigation, probably because they did it. In a 1990s interview, the investigator claimed that Russian officials pressured him to remove any mention of UFOs from his records. What does this mean? Well, maybe they said that because they didn't want people to think he was crazy and not taking the investigation seriously, or maybe it's some kind of bigger KGB UFO collaboration cover-up. There was one other explanation given by authorities, and that was that all 9 hikers had suffered from something known as infrasound, a phenomenon in which sound waves and frequencies below the lower limit of human audibility affect the inner ear and cause vertigo, imbalance, irritability, incapacitation, disorientation, nausea, aggression, and inner organ vibrations. Basically, what the Russian government wants you to believe is that the structure of the Ural Mountains caused the wind to create a low hum that drove the hikers completely mad and led to them killing one another and themselves, which I suppose would actually explain a lot and make a lot of sense, except for the fact that their clothing was radioactive. So personally, I'm just not buying it. Unfortunately, that's all the information I have for you today. It's pretty much all the information on the case. I've been your host, Hannah Thompson, and I will see you in the next video.